I'm Sue Warwick Doederlein. My husband and I were on the faculty of Northern Illinois University from 1969 till his retirement in 2010 for matters of illness. And my husband and I were the classic high school sweetheart types. We were both born in Toledo, Ohio. He went to different grade schools than I, but we went to the same high school. And we met when he was the editor of the yearbook, and I was a social editor that I'd been hired by a committee of students. And he had a great opening line saying, "Hi, this is Get to Know Your Pot of Gold Staff Week. So let's go on a date." And I said, "Okay, let's go on a date. Football, Friday night. It's Toledo, Ohio. That's what you did in the late 50s. And from then on, we were together. In fact, I'm still wearing the ring he gave to me when I was 16 and he was 17. And we were on the yearbook trip to Columbia University in New York, where we won a first prize place for our yearbook. And he proposed to me, except that we weren't going to tell anyone because they would think we were insane. We went to college together. He was a whole year older than I. And so he turned down offers to both Harvard and Yale because, if you can believe this, 50 years ago, Harvard and Yale did not admit women. Harvard had women in its classes, so I was admitted to Radcliffe, but I didn't want to be kind of Harvard. If he was at Harvard, I wanted to be Harvard. Instead, he went to a small liberal arts college, DePaul University, and ultimately I followed him. We married right after my freshman year and his sophomore year, in part because we couldn't stand the restrictions that were placed on female students then. There was a thing called parietal hours, which meant that first-year women were locked up at 7:30 at night. We had to be in our dorms. Friday night, got to stay out till 10:30. And then, my goodness, 11 on Saturday. I, being the already fractious person I was, fought against that and insisted that if the reason was for our safety, why don't they lock up the men? Because we weren't marauding and committing rapes. And if that was the problem, I had a solution. Needless to say, my solution was not accepted, and I was considered that crazy woman who got married after her freshman year. Arthur and I got married, and I graduated in 3 years so that I could catch up with him, so that we could go on to graduate school together, because we planned to earn our PhDs and teach together at a university. We flipped a coin because we were both English majors as undergraduates, and we knew at that time that it was going to be very difficult to find tenure-track jobs at any place for two of us, but certainly if we were both in the same discipline, it was going to be impossible. So, flipped a coin, and I won or lost, depending on how one thinks of it. I got to stay in English, and my husband went to his backup choice, which was then called speech, with speech communication, and we earned our PhDs. After what was one of the ugliest parts of my life, he developed cancer. His first cancer surgery was the month after we graduated. His second, after they botched it, was discovered at Northwestern University at their health service, and we had to drop out because he needed surgery and then radiation therapy. And at that time, this is 1964, there were only 3 hospitals in the country that delivered radiation therapy because of the high levels of radiation that were required at the time. And they were Northwestern, University of Michigan, and Johns Hopkins, the Johns Hopkins University. University of Michigan was near our home in Toledo, so we went back home, lived with his parents, and we had a year of hell with his radiation treatment. After that, we were never going to be apart again. So I left University of Chicago, which was my intended school, and went to Northwestern to be with him to earn our PhDs. And then we decided we would go to, when we were looking for university positions, that we wanted to draw sort of a line around Northwestern because we had been actively involved in politics there. And also we had purchased an apartment building with our fellow graduate students. And so we wanted to be involved with that there. So we drew a line and we limited our job search to 90 miles from Evanston, and Northern Illinois University was one of the places. We got quite a few offers, but only one place was that would offer both of us tenure track positions. Several places did a sort of wink, wink. We'd like to hire both of you, but we'll hire one of you tenure track and the other can be an instructor. The obvious assumption being that I would be the one that would be the instructor and my husband would be the tenure track PhD faculty member. We didn't want that situation. We instead went to Northern, that was first experimenting with the idea that they would get rid of nepotism rules, except at the time of tenure, where it would be noted if two candidates were up for tenure that one was married to the other, which made us scared for 6 years, but not too scared to cause some trouble. The issues that had mattered most to me in my lifetime, and that was also true of my late husband's, started with the civil rights movement. And I think most of us who were leftist feminists started, if you're my age, which is, I was born July 4th, 1943, you were involved in the civil rights movement first, before you discovered that your place in the civil rights movement was, not surprisingly, secondary. You were the one who was to type up the memos, make the coffee. You were not one who was in a policy-making situation. We had been part of what was called the New University Conference, which was a left liberal group that was in a few institutions in the Midwest, but very active on the West Coast and on the East Coast. We decided we would start the Northern Illinois University chapter of the New University Conference. It was unique in that its goal was to unite faculty, staff, graduate students, and undergraduate students. There were no criteria other than some connection to Northern Illinois University for membership in the New University Conference. I
just want to ask, when did you arrive in DeKalb?
We arrived in DeKalb in the fall. Actually, I know exactly the date, September 8th. It was our 7th anniversary.
Okay, what year was that?
1969.
1969, okay.
And I always tease my colleagues because I ask them, do you know when we met? And they typically don't, even though in the class of 69 they hired 20 of us. Because at that time, the state of Illinois had master plan phase 1, 2, or I don't know what number. They've given up on master plans, I think, but master plan phase 2 or 3, whichever one we were under, said that we were going to be, by the year 1980, a university of 40,000 undergraduates. We also were building PhD programs. We had 3 when we came in 1969, English, chemistry, and history. But we planned to build more, and we did in the liberal arts and sciences. And we had one ed doc program in the College of Education, and it was affiliated with business. It was called Business Education. So we came in 69, and 1969, 1970 was absolutely the most tumultuous year in the history of Northern Illinois University. It was not the worst year. The worst year was the year that a graduate student whom I had known as an undergraduate assassinated 5 students on the Northern Illinois campus on February 14th, 2008. But the most tumultuous year was 1969, 1970. Another thing that attracted us to Northern, other than the fact that we wanted jobs where both of us could be on a tenure track, was the Chance program. The Chance program had been started because of a demonstration that had happened. Well, at least that had been one of the triggers that started the Chance program. There was a demonstration in the president's office in then Loudon Hall. Altgeld was in such bad shape at that time that they'd moved the administrative types to Loudon Hall, which was a relatively new building. And Altgeld housed registration and records, perhaps admissions. I don't remember that part as clearly, but we founded the New University Conference and participated in the Chance program. And the Chance program, which stands for Complete Help and Assistance Necessary for a College Education, an acronym that was developed by its founding father, McKinley Deacon Davis, and his colleague, Robert Stearns, in response to a student demonstration that held. This took place before, so this part is not my personal knowledge, but the story that the Chance people told me. And that was that in May of 68, some African-American students held a demonstration in Roten Smith's office, President Roten Smith's office, and had a series of demands, some of which he told them he could not give them because he played no role in curriculum. They wanted a Black Studies major. They wanted a required Black Studies course in racism, white racism. But then they wanted a program that would admit students who didn't meet the traditional admission criteria, but showed the ability, or the potential at least, to be able to succeed at Northern. That program finally became a reality because of the courage of Roten Smith, because he didn't have, I don't think, very much support, certainly not in the community. And by that I mean the Northern Illinois University community, but I think it was also true of the DeKalb community, because an influx of minority students into DeKalb in 1969 was not probably people's greatest top 10 list choice. And we admitted, apparently in spring of 69, which was before my husband and I came. We came in September of 1969, as I've said. Admitted a few students, but the fall of 69 was the first large class of Chance students. Chance was set as a maximum of 500 students. That was thought to be a right proportion at the time. I'm not sure how in the world they figured that out, but they figured out 500 students. But they hadn't developed a curriculum, and my husband and I were part of the group, each in our respective departments, that developed a curriculum, because obviously students who didn't meet our traditional admission criteria might struggle in their regular courses, and certainly struggled, we were seeing it, in their regular English course, which I taught, and in their regular speech course, which my husband taught. So it was our plan to develop a curriculum that would allow chance students to get extra assistance in their first year in their English courses and in their speech courses, and also in their reading courses. I'm sorry, I forgot that one part that is outside of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, which is where we were affiliated. There was a reading course in the College of Education that was also instrumental, and we worked to develop that. But while we were developing courses for our Chance program with the Chance students whom we loved, I don't know how Deacon Davis, whom I knew because I am a then closet, now openly avid sports fan. It was unusual, it was thought, for a woman to be into sports in 1969, long before Doederlein, but I love sports, all sports, particularly football, because I'm from Ohio, but also basketball. And so I knew of McKinley Deacon Davis because he was a member of the Harlem Globetrotters, and I'd actually seen him play in Toledo, Ohio. So how Deacon Davis had the ability to pick the 500 best students, I don't know, but I'm sad to think that at least rumor has it that the success rate of Chance students was higher back then than it is now. I know one thing is true. We saw to it in English and in speech and in reading that they got the most committed instructors and instructors that were willing to deal with the fact that you might start with a student, as I did in English, who could not commit a proper English sentence. And it was your job to get them through the freshman English sequence, which required that you write a research paper by the end of the year. So, my passion was for my students in Chance, as well as the students in the other courses I taught. My field is Restoration and 18th Century British Literature, but it was already beginning to shift because I was beginning to discover that I was one of those women who, that was a phrase I heard a lot, I was discovering that in the New University Conference, which was a group that sought equity for all minority people in the United States of America and freedom for everyone, didn't quite practice what we preached when it came to women. Even in the New University Conference, we weren't in a leadership role. And this troubled me, and it troubled my husband more than a little. But a number of things happened in 1969-70. The thing that haunted the fall semester was the prospect of the first national draft. December 1st, 1969 was the first time this country held a national draft lottery. Before then, young men were subject to the vagaries or the largesse of their local draft boards. My husband was lucky in that regard because when you explain that you've had cancer, your draft board decides you're not a good choice to go to Vietnam. They didn't know he wasn't a good choice for other reasons, minimally his active opposition to the war. Just having cancer was enough. But on teaching that fall semester was very difficult because every young man who was turning 19, and I taught 2 freshman classes that year, was going to know his fate on December 1st, 1969, because his birthday would be drawn on TV, those cute little black and white TVs, and they were put in a lottery thing, and they acted as though it was a game show. I remember the first date that was drawn only because a dear English graduate of Northern, Rita Dragonette, has written a book with the title September 14th. That was the first unlucky number that was drawn from the lottery. And that meant if you were born on September 14th, you were going to Vietnam at the end of that year. They allowed you to work out the year, but then you were going directly to Vietnam, unless you had a health problem that was serious or bone spurs of some crazy kind if you were going to become the President of the United States and act crazy. So everyone was focused on December 1st. The women were just as focused in many ways as the guys because they had boyfriends, lovers, brothers. They cared very much about who was going to get drafted on December 1st. And basically, the first 150 birth dates that were drawn were highly probable candidates for going to Vietnam at the end of that year. So the atmosphere on campus was incredibly volatile. It was volatile for us in a different way because part of our role in the New University Conference was to make common cause, as all the chapters did, with the Black Panther Party. All of the New University Conference meetings were held at our apartment, 404 Suburban Apartments. And we regularly invited representatives of the Black Panthers to come and make their pitch to us to solicit funding for what the Black Panthers were responsible for starting in Chicago and on both of the coasts, breakfast and lunch programs for people on the south and west side in Chicago. Being the idiot I was, the very naive working class Toledo girl, I had no idea that the Black Panthers would come equipped with guns, but I bet if I was going into their neighborhood and I was able to handle a gun, I might have brought my firearm with me also, but they always brought their guns, and every time they came, it threw me because I'd never been so close to a gun before. I was working class, but I was privileged. In the sense of not having had any introduction to the firearms of any kind. The Black Panther Party came and solicited funds, and we supported them in whatever way we could. Then Northern Illinois University and my husband and I were going to play a role in a disaster that happened after the drawing on December 1st, and that was on December 4th. December 4th, 1969, Chairman Fred Hampton and co-chairman, or I'm not sure his title, but Mark Clark, were assassinated in their beds by the Chicago police and a special task force of unknown composition. That latter part was discovered in the hearings that were held and the judgment that was finally made much later in favor of Fred Hampton's partner and Fred Hampton Jr., the baby that she had held beneath her body when the shots all came into the apartment. Over 200 shots came into the apartment on the south side. There were 4 shots that went out. Whether they were defensive shots, we don't know. They might have been, it came out in the trial, possible shots that came by accident from the guns when Fred Hampton and Mark Clark died. They slept with their guns as well as their wives and their babies. Because we were thought to have ethos, because we were professors, we were called by the remainder of the grieving Black Panther Party to come see the crime zone, which had not oddly been secured by the Chicago police. I have no idea if they normally didn't secure crime scenes on the south side. I don't know why, but they said they wanted us. I'm fairly sure it was on a Friday, because on Saturday we rented a bus and got as many professorial types as we could and got on that bus and went to the south side and had a tour of the carnage. I'd never seen a blood-filled apartment before. A couple of the members who went with us became ill. And I don't know whether, I assume it was because it was a rare sight to have a Greyhound bus that was chartered bring a whole bunch of white people to that particular neighborhood. I could find it, but I sadly can't tell you the streets. I should have looked them up. But where the apartment was. So by the time our tour of the carnage was over, all the Chicago media had gathered, print media and the local TV stations, and they wanted to interview someone. People chose me because I was the one who'd been the organizer, and I said categorically no, because I didn't look a bit professorial. I wanted to pick the person who was the most professorial looking, and I was 26 years old, female, didn't fit the bill. But with us on the bus was a person whom I admired tremendously, Sherman Stanage. He was, I believe, then the chair of the Department of Philosophy. He was frequently the chair of our Department of Philosophy. He also was an ordained minister. And he went everywhere with a tweed jacket that had leather patches. So he wore that to visit a Black Panther apartment where people had been killed. He actually had a pipe and a beard, and the beard was beginning to turn white. And obviously, he looked like a professor. So he was on TV. And Sherman Stanage showed what we had borne witness to, and we had a number of people in our group who knew they were hunters themselves, and they knew how to check trajectories of bullets. And the bullets were all inward bound, all the bullet holes that we could see. And the Black Panther showed us hundreds of them. Northern Illinois University made headlines for that group of faculty who came to testify about what had happened to Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. Not surprisingly, it wasn't a very popular move with our departments because this kind of publicity was not what they wanted to have known, because they asked, among the questions they asked Sherman Stanage were what departments were represented, and so he tried to list off to give credit or notoriety, I guess, it became to some of the departments that had people on the bus. But we had made it clear that we didn't represent. We represented ourselves and the New University Conference. But then there came spring of 1970. The spring of 1970 was a real education for us. And it was a study in contrast of how things happened at Northwestern, our alma mater for our PhDs and our master's degrees, and how things happened at Northern during the spring. Already, it was a volatile time. Spring wasn't over. Nowadays, it went well into June. Final exams were the second week in June, I think. I'm fairly sure that's when they were. But on May 11th, there had been let's go backwards. There had been protests on campuses all over the country about our involvement in the Vietnam War, and it spread that we had been assured would not happen into Cambodia. Those of us who opposed the war in Vietnam were even more angry when it was clear that it was going to go further into Cambodia. So there were demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations on all campuses. The New University Conference was instrumental in leading them here at Northern. They all ended up in what was called the free speech area at that time. You have to picture a very different Northern Illinois University than the one we have now. Swen Parson was our library. The Founders Memorial Library that we have now didn't exist. It was part of a wonderful arboretum The psych computer science building didn't exist, nor did Montgomery Hall. Those things were taken out later. So when I'm about to describe the events that happened, I'm describing events that concluded at the free speech area, but then involved a lot of people moving toward Lincoln Highway through the Arboretum, through the trees, a beautiful treed area. Some people went down Carolina Avenue to Lincoln Highway. Some people went through the trees to Lincoln Highway. I think most of the people who had ill intent at the time went through the trees. It had been our advocacy that there be no violence. But the killings at Kent State on, I think, May 4th. I'm not sure. I'm really foggy on the dates. I know May 4th might have been the killings at Kent State. That's a situation for you young people the National Guard was active in trying to get orderly conduct at Kent State. There were a lot of marches there. We knew a number of the faculty there because some of them had earned their PhDs with us and had taken jobs at Kent State. They hadn't drawn the kind of restriction around Evanston that we did. And so we knew some activists there, and there had been a number of marches, but on Kent State, the National Guard killed, I believe, 5 people, mostly students, undergraduates, but I believe one young woman was not a student. I don't know why she was even on campus that day. But suddenly, there was a whole new twist to the anti-war movement, and that is, our troops are turning on us. Part of us thought that there was a class warfare a bit involved in it, because the troops that were already there were people who had been chosen old school draft style, which meant that if you had wealthy parents or parents with connections, you weren't going to be called up. But if you didn't have those connections, or if you didn't have cancer, I never recommend having cancer as a reason for getting out of anything. But you were the kind of people who were going to be going to war. Also, if you were a minority person, it was less likely that you would be able to avail yourself of getting out of the war if, in fact, you wanted to get out of the Vietnam War. And I think any reasonable young man wanted to, because the kill rate of the soldiers there was abominable. And it was, the number was announced every night on TV. It was our first televised war, which is one of the reasons the opposition, I think, was so strong. But after Kent State, a week later, we had a moratorium. Classes were called off for 2 days. And then there was Jackson State. It's a historically black college, and the same thing happened. Black students were killed. I believe they were mostly female, and they were in a residence hall, but killed by troops, our own troops, turning on our students. And when you're going to kill my students or turn your guns on my students, I want to be with them. I want to be in front of them. But our goal that night, that terrible night, I think it was May 11th, 1969, it was after Jackson State, was to avoid students doing what they had done after Kent State. They had basically trashed Village Commons bookstore, and a few windows had been broken downtown, not many. Downtown was a very busy place then. You bought all your clothes. There was a place called Honey Girl. If you can believe it, this activist leftist bought her clothes at a place called Honey Girl. I was not a girl then. I was a woman, but I had really cute clothes, so there you went. But we didn't want people to engage in anything other than nonviolent activity. We participated in a march that had over 3,000 people that went around the residence halls, ended in the free speech area. Father Joppy, James Joppy, was on campus then. He was a leftist priest who was against the war. And he had given a very fiery speech, so everybody was up in arms and angry. And as we were leaving to go back to suburban apartments and go to sleep and urging people not to go downtown, we heard cries of Lincoln Highway, and we left and drove home and went to bed. We didn't know it because we were good sleepers when we were young. But our phone lines had been cut. We don't know why or by whom. We speculated that they had been cut by someone connected with the people who were billeted at the National Guard Armory in Sycamore or the police department. That's how far left we were. We were very suspicious. We were known people. We were known people who hated the war. We didn't hate the National Guard. We didn't hate the soldiers, but we hated the war that they were having to fight. Our phone line was cut. People went to Lincoln Highway, and there's that famous picture, one of the most famous pictures of Northern Illinois University ever, of Roten Smith in a baseball cap. Oddly, first of all, it wasn't a Cubs cap, so I didn't care what it was, but he had a baseball cap. He might have been Boston Red Sox. Woo, problematic. But he had a baseball cap, and he heard at midnight from the campus police that the students had taken over Lincoln Highway. They had a sit-in at the bridge at Lincoln Highway, which doesn't seem like much of a bridge to those of us who are used to big Chicago kind of bridges. But they sat down in the middle of Lincoln Highway. The tollway wasn't there, and so Lincoln Highway happened to be a huge east-west truck traffic route. And the local police had to route trucks, and because this is 1, 2 in the morning, around the place and around the blockade of human beings. And Roten Smith came with them and sat with them and talked about their concerns, but told them that their concerns would not be resolved by violence, whether it be violence against the National Guard that was billeted now at the Sycamore Armory and had come in buses towards Lincoln Highway. It would not be the case that anything would be resolved. And at 3 in the morning, Roten Smith was told by whoever was leading the National Guard and the campus police and the local police that they had to he had to leave, or he would be considered to be one of the people who would be subject to arrest. So Roten Smith went home very, very unhappily. And some people went back to the residence halls and proceeded to trash those. Some people went uptown and broke a tremendous amount of windows, plate glass windows, all up Lincoln Highway. And there were lots of stores then, men's stores, women's stores. Once again, the Village Common bookstore that had just replaced their windows, they broke those windows. And we were awakened at 5 in the morning when one of the members of the New University Conference knocked on our door and yelled at us to open the door. They'd been trying to call us all night because they wanted us to come bail out the young women and the young men that had been arrested. We got into our car. My husband was a car man. When we got 2 tenure track jobs, we decided we'd splurge and sell our little car, our MGA, and buy a Jaguar XKE, sable brown. It was his favorite toy. And we called it the People's Jaguar, which was stupid. We didn't let just anyone drive it, but we went back and forth from Sycamore to DeKalb. I believe the young men that were arrested were held in Sycamore, the young women in the DeKalb jail. I think that's the way it went, but we alternated with the money we had bailing out. They made a rule, which we thought was arbitrary, made up for us, but you could only bail out one person an hour at each place. So we bailed out a person in DeKalb. We'd bail out a person in Sycamore, back and forth with me sitting. It's a two-seater, but I could sit in the middle. And hear all the stories the students had to tell of what had happened and what had done. I believe Northern Illinois University had the worst violence of any campus. And that led, that night, after that night, the violence and the arrests, basically we had another moratorium and people were done. Finals were over. Some young men left to go to Vietnam. And we went to see what happened in Evanston because of our ties there. Students at Evanston had blockaded Sheridan Road, which, if you know that, is one of the most important, at the time, north-south roads up to the posh northern suburbs. And yet the police in Evanston decided to let the students stay. And they stayed for a week. And because classes were called off here, we went to party with them. And there was drinking involved on the great open green where I had once stood and put a daffodil in a naval ROTC person's rifle, and he didn't know what to do, and I didn't really know what to do after I put my daffodil in, other than to follow the mantra that always was chicks up front. Even though I wasn't a chick, I was not a tiny bird, but always they wanted women up front because we were thought to be a distraction to the troops. The people who arrested us kind of liked us because I weighed less than my husband did. And I think Northwestern handled it brilliantly by just letting the students stay until they got tired and they were drunk and stoned, and finally they went home and Sheridan Road was open. But from then on, we continued our activism, but it began to lessen as we began to talk about something that we had not ever discussed before, having kids. My husband told me in December of 1977 that he wanted to have a baby, and I said, good luck with that. Yeah. I had used, when in all interviews, which when they ask you in those days if you were a woman and a married woman, when you intended to have a child. And I had a pat, wonderful response. I can't do it now because I'm old, but I would look down in a dowerful and look in my lap for a while and say that, well, we've been married 7 years, so. And that ended the conversation of our childbirth. We were coming up for tenure. It was 1974, 73. I'm sorry, I got the dates wrong. It was December of 1973. And my husband said he wanted a child, and I said, okay, we'll try it. But I'm going to set a limit on this. We're going to try for 2 months. And we got pregnant right away, and we had our son. And then 4 years later, I told my husband, I want to have a child. And he said, what do you mean? We're just out of the woods. He can walk, he can talk, he's become a rational human being. We might be able to get back to our work. Because scholarship, of course, is one of the requirements of being a tenured faculty member at Northern. But I said, no, this time I want to get it right. I want to know what it's like to be pregnant. I want to experience it and experience it in the moment, because the first time I think I always thought, even though I kept getting bigger and bigger, I was just getting fatter and fatter. I had a PhD. How could I get pregnant? I didn't know. But I said, okay, we're going to set another limit on this. My gynecologist had said when I had Alan, my now 45-year-old son, he'll be 45 in the end of this month, that because of my hypertension and because of the fact that I went into myxedema with Alan, he would not deliver a child of mine if I were over 35. And I had calculated exactly what we had to do, and I said, we have to get pregnant by March with the second. We have to get pregnant by, no, I'm sorry, I got the date wrong, but we have to get pregnant so that I have the baby before July 4th, 1978, because on that day I'm going to be 35. And I really think he was probably right, that it's because the name for what I was first was an elderly primipara, then I was an elderly multipara, and I thought that was ridiculous because I only had just the one kid, so I wanted to be an elderly unipara. But at any rate, we had our daughter, who in fact is our greatest gift to Northern Illinois University. Our son would not come to Northern because with a name like Doederlein, he figured everybody would hate his mother, his father, or both. Kathy, who was always a tougher cookie, said, probably people hate my mother and my father. It doesn't matter to me. I like the school. I've always liked it. They have a program I like. It happens to be in communication. So I know they're going to hate my father. But we happen to have the ability to conceive children. And I know now what a great gift that was, because after being married 12 years, we had our second child. And we were very fortunate to have two healthy babies, and one of whom is now in career services at Northern and is president of the Supportive Professional Staff Council and is, as I've said, our greatest gift to Northern. What I valued about Northern is the many gifts it gave to me. It gave me the opportunity first to turn down the job I'd fought for of being the first affirmative action officer. Rotensmith's successor, Dick Nelson, had a cocktail party at his house before a football game. And then the day after that, I invited Arthur and me, and we didn't know why he invited us, other than that he was a very good friend of Arthur's dissertation director at Northwestern. He invited us to a party, and then the next day, he offered me the job of being affirmative action officer. And I consulted with the women that I'd been working with in a group that was called AWE, Academic Women for Equality. And they changed the name to Organization for Academic Women's Equality, which I thought was really not nearly so good as AWE. But we wanted an affirmative action officer. Now we were going to get one, and it was going to be but I turned down the job because there hadn't been a search. There hadn't been a job description. So I wrote up a job description that I thought would work, and I went back to the president, who had given me 2 days to consult with my husband, and I consulted with everybody I could. Most of them said, take the job. He might not give it to somebody else. I told him that there needed to be a search, there needed to be search criteria, and I wouldn't be a candidate because I didn't want to be thought to be on the inward track. So we picked the best affirmative action officer, Pat Lattin, that I could imagine. I had worked with Vern Lattin, her husband, in the Chance program. But I had the chance to become the first woman dean of any kind in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I was offered a job in 1983 for 1 year only to be acting assistant dean of undergraduate students in liberal arts and sciences. There had never been anything but male deans up till then. So I took the job on an acting basis. I was replacing Rada Gotti, who was trying to get the Department of Computer Science under control. Turned out that took more than a year, so my 1-year gig turned into a 4-year gig that somehow kept getting renewed and my title kept getting changed. But I was the first woman and only woman dean of any stripe. Now, thankfully, we have our first woman senior dean, the woman who is dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, not associate dean in charge of undergraduate students, is Judy Ledgerwood, my colleague, whom I remember when we hired in '96. Another thing it gave me the chance to do, besides being a woman who was a dean, being a dean and a professor was not a woman's job when I started out, was the Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching Award that I received and that my husband received 10 years later. When he received the award, he mentioned that he'd received an Excellence in Teaching Award from the School of Speech at Northwestern, and he only was 4 years there. It took him 20 years here. And someone asked him why he thought it took 20 years to get the award here, and Arthur said in his usual manner that, well, Northern students are a tougher crowd. I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to work here for 45 years with my kind of students. Many of them are first-generation college, as my husband and I were. Only one of our parents was a high school graduate, but they supported us in our goals even though they didn't know what the heck they were. So I was also glad that 10 years later, he received the Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching Award, and if you go to the Home Student Center, there's a plaque that has the names of all the Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching Award recipients, and his name is right next to mine, 10 years apart, and how the serendipity of that happened, I don't know. And the final thing I'm grateful for is the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences according me the Distinguished Faculty Award. There are only a few of us, and it is my greatest honor, that and the Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching Award. My greatest honor ultimately is working with undergraduate students. They're the reason we're here. If I have a PhD student, I actually asked the English department to take me off the graduate faculty because I was 30 years as someone who had to deal with undergraduates only and was privileged to have that responsibility. I didn't think I should work with graduate students, but also if they need me, they shouldn't be in graduate school. They should be independent scholars themselves. But undergraduate students needed me and needed people like me. Many undergraduates asked Arthur and me about getting married after their freshman year. They thought that was a cool idea that we did that. And they were always disappointed about our answer, which was that if you ask someone if you should get married, then the answer has to be no, because we didn't ask anybody. We just chose to do it ourselves. We knew we could do it. We knew we had finally the support of our parents, who didn't think getting married young was that strange because they had gotten married young. At least my parents had. So it was a privilege to work at Northern for 45 years, and my husband and I to have a combined 40 and 45 years, so 85 years at NIU. It's one of the finest institutions, and it's an institution for working class people at Northern Illinois, minority students, majority students who might become minority students and will demographically probably, and not in my lifetime, but hopefully in the lifetime of the young people we're dealing with now. It's a great school. It has great faculty who do outstanding research, and it has great students. And I think that's about what I have to offer you.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome, James.